Well, good morning. Hope your Sunday is off to a good start. You know, a few weeks ago we told you our story about the man from Trenary. Since there was so much interest, it seemed appropriate that we bring the story to a conclusion. We'll do that later in the show. But first, the CEO of Cleveland Cliffs was in town recently and created a lot of interest with his comment that there could be new life for the Empire Mine. This morning we'll share that conversation I had with him on that subject and more. It starts right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, iron mining is still a major contributor to the Upper Peninsula economy, providing over 900 jobs and significant additional spending for supplies, services, and taxes to local and state government. But it's a far cry from what it was 40 years ago, when Cliffs employed about 5,000 people and local employment took an additional hit about 2 years ago as the company began to wind down operations at the Empire Mine, leaving only one operating mine, the Tilden, to continue here. But recently, Lorenzo Gonzalez, the Cleveland Cliffs CEO, told community leaders that Empire could play a part in a future expansion by the company. I talked with him following that meeting and asked him specifically about the opportunities for Empire. Well, clearly the headline coming out of today's story will be the fact that you've said there's some new opportunities possibly for the Empire Mine. Can you tell us what that's about?
Absolutely, I'll be glad. At this moment, we have a decision to make if we're going to grow the company in Minnesota or in Michigan. We are going to go either or. There's no alternative that would be both. We are at the moment that we are maxed out in terms of our production capacity. We are initiating a new path toward producing feedstock to supply the electric arc furnaces in Toledo, Ohio, with our HBI plant, and our growth will be in that route. In order to be able to do so, we need to mine more ore. We acquired last year two properties here in Michigan, the minority position at the Tilden Mine and the minority position at the Empire Mine. And at this point, we own 100% of the mines and mineral resources, as well as the two pellet plants in the area. On the other hand, I also acquired land in Nashwauk, Minnesota, that could be a good and maybe less costly alternative to produce ore. So one or the other will be our path of choice. It's not just an economic decision. It's a decision that goes through the price tag to pay, and the price tag to pay is a little lower here, but also a decision that will go through time. At the same token that it's cheaper to go the Minnesota route, it's longer in terms of time to execute in Minnesota, especially because there is not a lot of consensus in terms of what they want. So even though it costs more money to build in Michigan, it will be faster to build in Michigan. So that's the decision that we are having to go, decision process that we have to go through at this point.
I think people here want to know then, what do they have to do to have you make the decision to come to Empire Mine?
If Michigan demonstrates that they have a resolve, a unified resolve behind having Cliffs growing mining here, we will be here, because I don't feel like I have that type of support in Minnesota. And that's a lot more important to me than just dollars.
Okay. Does this in any way affect the future of the Tilden Mine?
Not the future of the Tilden Mine, because the Tilden Mine has a long life of mine ahead of it. So we are in great shape in Tilden. And we are going to be producing in Tilden no matter what for at least the next 30 years. But it may affect very significantly Empire, because we can eventually bring that pellet plant back to operation. We can remove overburden and start mining at Empire again. So that's very meaningful for the community, because we'll be employing people, we'll be hiring people and generating new jobs.
When do you expect to make that decision?
Sometime this year, and more likely around the middle of the year.
One of the key decisions made last year was to come up with a solution for replacing the Presque Isle power plant, which provides much of the power needed by your operations. Is that new plan still on track?
Well, it's still on track, and we are very pleased with our work with the government of Michigan, with Governor Snyder leadership, with our work with WEC, with the Wisconsin Energy Company. We are very proud that we resolved our problem for Cliffs and also resolved the problems that were being very serious in front of the ratepayers, the households in the Upper Peninsula. So that was a good demonstration of how powerful we can be when we work together. Cleveland Cliffs, the elected officials in Michigan, and the private sector. So that's actually a good example that we're bringing that demonstrates how good this cooperation can be for the communities and for the state.
We had a lot more questions for the Cliffs CEO. We'll get to those after this break. Lourenco Gonzalez took over the leadership of Cleveland Cliffs after a group of shareholders launched a proxy battle for control of the company, and he set out immediately to make major changes. I asked him about the progress he had made in implementing his strategy. When you took over the company about three and a half years ago, it seems that among your key priorities were, number one, restructuring the company to get rid of some assets that you felt were really burdening the company, and then also to reduce a very significant amount of debt. Where do you feel you are in that process now?
I think with the debt, we are completely done. We were able to bring down the net debt of $3.2 billion that I found when I joined the company down to $1.3 billion, even after making costly acquisitions like the three that I mentioned to you, the minority position Tilde, minority position Empire, and the land in Nashwauk, Minnesota. Even with that, and I spent real cash acquiring these three properties, our net debt now is $1.3 billion. And also reduced the interest expense paid yearly from $230 million in 2015 to $130 million as we speak. So we feel like debt-wise we are pretty much done. As far as assets, I still have one asset that I need to unload, and that's Australia, and that will be done more likely than not throughout 2018, maybe early 2019, but Australia is in its last legs.
And when all of that's done, all of your assets will be iron ore related in the United States?
Absolutely right. We will be in Minnesota with 3 operations or 4, depending on what Minnesota will decide, and we will decide together with Minnesota. And in Michigan with 2 operations or 1 operation, depending on what we decide with Michigan, and 1 operation in Toledo, Ohio.
You recently announced the company's results for the past year, showing a considerable increase in the company's profits. Were you satisfied with the results?
I am, especially because we are still dealing with a market for steel for my clients here in the United States that is still burdened by a lot of unfairly traded steel coming from outside, foreign steel that is dumped into the United States. We believe that this thing is being fixed. At least we have the tools to fix the problem now that the Department of Commerce released the report to the White House on recommendations based on the Section 232 of the Trade Act of 1964. So we believe that we are on the path of having even a better market for my clients, and when they do well, we do well.
Speaking of Washington, we recently had the Tax Reform Act passed. Will that provide benefits for Cliffs?
Twofold in terms of, yes, and the benefit is twofold. One, we got a refund, a cash refund of $250 million that will be paid over a period of 4 years, being the first installment paid in 2019 of half of that money, so it's real money. We will receive a total of $250 million over these 4 years. And the second benefit is that the tax reform will allow us to utilize our losses of the past and be able to offset our tax payments, because we are a profitable company now, and we would have to pay taxes otherwise. But now we can utilize our tax liabilities in full, and that will make us not to be paying taxes out of the door for at least 20 years. So that's a great thing. We are not going to be burdened with big tax bills for the next 20 years. On top of that, the revocation of the alternate minimum tax generated a refund in cash that's very meaningful of $250 million. So Cliffs is very pleased with the implementation of the tax reform.
When we return, we'll talk about the new venture the company entered into last year. We've shared this information before, but I think it's worth repeating. For many years, most of the steel in this country was produced by feeding iron ore into a blast furnace. But today that's changed. Many blast furnaces have been shut down, and the majority of steel is now produced in electric furnaces, which primarily reprocess scrap. While the iron ore mined in Michigan and Minnesota goes through an extensive process to upgrade the low-grade ore to high-grade pellets, the resulting product is not metallurgically changed. It's still iron ore. More importantly to this discussion, iron ore pellets cannot be used in electric furnaces, so the market for pellets has gotten smaller. But there are limitations to the quality of the steel that can be produced by repeatedly recycling scrap. So the electric furnace operators are looking for virgin iron units, and the Cliffs chairman views this as an opportunity for the company. In layman's terms, by putting the pellets through another complex processing step, they could be used by the electric furnaces, which is why Cliffs plans to build an HBI plant to do just that. Here then is our conversation with Gonzalez on that subject. You announced last year plans to construct an HBI plant in Toledo, Ohio. Are those plans moving ahead?
Moving ahead on time, on schedule. Great relationship with the EPA, perfect relationship with the state of Ohio and the city of Toledo, the Port Authority. Everybody is energized and excited. We are on schedule. We raised the money in full to fund the construction, the entire project last year at fixed interest rate of 3.4%, $700 million. So we are full steam ahead with that project.
Maybe you could explain why this benefits really the mines back in Minnesota and Michigan to have this plant.
Well, during the last 27 years, electric arc furnaces went from 30% of the share of the steel making production in the United States to 67% today. So blast furnaces continue to shrink while electric arc furnaces continues to grow. As far as the pellets we have been producing historically, they only go to blast furnaces. So we are now producing what's called DR grade pellets, pellets that can feed DRI facilities, direct reduction iron facilities. And we have been supplying in the outside the ones that have direct reduction. At this point, we are ready to build our own first direct reduction facility to produce what's called HBI, hot briquetted iron. And this will be feedstock for the EAFs. Long story short, with our first HBI facility, we are creating a new market avenue to supply pellets produced in Minnesota and hopefully in Michigan as well, to supply those EAFs that are now the majority of steel making in the United States.
During the last year, you also decided to return the name of the company to Cleveland-Cliffs. I think a lot of people cheered that decision. Why did you do that?
Because that's the real name of the company. The previous name that I found when I got to the company was a name that was a name change based on a strategy that was wrong, that proved itself wrong. That was trying to diversify the company, but at the end of the day, was just diverting profits generated in Michigan and Minnesota to create a empire that had foundations that were really weak. So the assets that they acquired using profits generated from the taconite extracted in Michigan and the traconite extracted in Minnesota, those profits were being wasted. The company did not become a diversified mineral resources company. The company became a monster with a lot of assets that were not producing any income. And all the income was coming from the old Cleveland Cliffs, from the old taconite mines in Minnesota and the old taconite mines in Michigan. So now that we have already divested all the coal mines, we divested all the assets in Canada, including Bloom Lake, the biggest money-losing operation of all times. We divested chromite, we divested other minority participations in South American countries, and we only have Australia that's in the end of life of mine. That was the right time to bring back the real name of the company.
Now that you've had 3+ years, are you happy you took on this assignment?
I am extremely happy, and I feel more excited and more energized than in the first day.
And I just want to ask you once more, what can the community do to help see that Cliffs expands its operations here at the Empire Mine?
That's a great question. I think the community needs to really understand that the United States is a manufacturing country. We need to not only keep our ability to manufacture in the United States, but also grow our capacity to manufacture in the United States. And that can only be possible if we're mining here. We are landlocked here in the Midwest. We are shut down from the rest of the world by the St. Lawrence Seaway. The Great Lakes is a very unique area to be in. But we are the ones here in the Great Lakes, so we are the ones that have the logistic advantage of being here. However, we cannot export without paying a price for doing so. So we need to be self-sufficient here. So as long as we continue to grow manufacturing, we need to be able to support manufacturing, to supply manufacturing. Manufacturing is based on producing steel, and producing steel is based on producing iron ore. So if we decide that we are no longer a manufacturing country, we have no future here. But that's exactly the opposite that we should be doing. I'm a big advocate of the United States being a manufacturing country and continuing to grow as a manufacturing country. So that's basically the decision that the community needs to make. Are we going to continue to be a manufacturing country, or are we going to evolve into something that may look trendy right now, but 40, 50 years from now can be shown to be a disastrous decision? So that's what the community needs to start to discuss. Are we going Bitcoin, or are we going to stay with manufacturing? That's what we need to make a decision on.
Mr. Gonzalez pointed out in his remarks to community leaders that Cliffs has been around for over 170 years. I did have an opportunity to remind him that it all started here, and hopefully that will be considered when he decides the future possibilities for the Empire Mine. I'll be back. A few weeks back, I presented a story poem about a man from Trenary who became trapped in the Marquette roundabouts. It received as much reaction as anything we've ever done on this show. But there was also concern, as some worried about his plight. Was the man from Trenary destined to spend the rest of his life just riding through the Marquette roundabouts? Well, as the former radio commentator Paul Harvey used to say, let me tell you the rest of the story. A woman in Trenary sits quietly in her chair, wondering why the husband she loves isn't there. One day he left home, a dentist to see. Now she just sits and wonders where he might be. A week ago he set out on 3 different days, going to Marquette to find his way through the maze. He left twice that week and came home in a tizzy, mumbling how roundabouts were making him dizzy. She begged him to stay home and let his tooth issues wait, but he was determined to get there, no matter his fate. So he left once more, with determination on his face. That time he was certain he would finish the race. But that's the last she heard from the man she holds dear. And now she sits and wonders, why isn't he here? She's kept herself busy making cookies and cake. If only he'd return, all his favorites she'd make. Finally she said, I can't take this anymore, so she grabbed her coat and headed out the door. I'm going to Marquette, and I will find my man. Not sure what I should do, and I don't have a plan. She drove to the city on the usual route, and then she encountered her first roundabout. She went round that circle, easily passing the test, and she hit the exit on the bypass heading west. She reached roundabout 2. Once again it was fine, so she stepped on the gas and started down the line. But as she looked out, just what did she see? There was her husband sitting under a tree. She pulled over her car, ran and gave him a hug and said, just where have you been, you big lug? He said, I've been trapped in this roundabout maze. I've lost track of time, but I know it's been days. Follow me, she said. I'll show you the way. We'll be back in Trenary before the end of the day. And now they sit at their table with coffee and toast. The kind from Trenary, they like that the most. And he tries to explain why he could not find his way, how he went through those roundabouts day after day from Front Street to Baraga with 7th in the middle. He just could not figure out the roundabout riddle. Don't worry, she said. You're now safely home. There's no need to leave, no reason to roam. The moral of the story? That's difficult to say. Could women be better drivers? Just could be that way. At least we know in one home that certainly is true, a place where the wife really knew what to do. Asking for directions isn't something men do well. Perhaps if he'd asked for help, we'd have a different story to tell. But now they're united. Of that there's no fear. The woman from Trenary and the man she holds dear. And so ends our story. It's the end of the line. And for the man from Trenary, that's really just fine. Back in a minute. Time to wrap it up for another week. Keep in mind, if you miss any of our reports, they are available at uppermichigansource.com. The Cleveland Cliffs chairman created a lot of interest when he announced that there could be a new opportunity for the Empire Mine. We'll be watching carefully to see how that plays out. Thanks for joining us this morning. Look forward to seeing you again next Sunday morning.